On May 26, 1828, an object was recorded on Unschlittplatz in Nuremberg, whose appearance initiated one of the most extensive administrative, political crises in the history of the German confederations of the 19th century. In the hands of a young man who possessed an extremely limited lexical vocabulary and exhibited signs of profound social deprivation, were two documents. The first, a letter addressed to the captain of the 4th Squadron of the 6th Regiment of Light Cavalry, in which an anonymous sender, calling himself a poor day laborer, reported that the youth had been entrusted to him for upbringing in October 1812 and had been kept in complete isolation. The second document, allegedly written by the mother of the foundling 16 years earlier, contained an indication of his name, Caspar, and an assertion that his father, a cavalry officer, had ceased to exist. However, paleographic analysis conducted by experts of the magistracy revealed the identity of the handwriting in both letters, while the use of Latin cursive, uncharacteristic of the lower strata of society in that period, pointed to a staging. The letters were not an act of mercy. They were an instrument of sanctioned disposal of an object that had become a burden to the system that had ensured its hidden maintenance for 16 years. Before we proceed to a detailed analysis of this complex institutional scheme, I ask you to subscribe to the channel. Your support allows us to continue archival research and restore historical truth, relying solely on documents and facts. To understand the nature of the Caspar-Hauser phenomenon, it is necessary to conduct an audit of the political state of the Grand Duchy of Baden in the first third of the 19th century. The state was in a dynastic impasse caused by the rules of agnatic primogeniture. Grand Duke Charles, who ruled from 1811 to 1818, had no direct male heirs capable of ascending the throne. His wife, Stéphanie de Beauharnais, the adoptive daughter of Napoleon Bonaparte, gave birth to a son in 1812, who, according to the official medical report of October 24th of that year, ceased to exist at the age of 16 days. A second son, born in 1816, was also declared non-viable. Under the conditions of the Salic law, the absence of direct heirs meant the transfer of power to the line of the Counts von Hochberg, descendants of Grand Duke Charles Frederick from his morganatic marriage to Baroness Geira von Geiersberg. The legal status of the Hochbergs was extremely vulnerable, and their right to the throne was recognized only on the basis of a patent from 1817, which was contested by other German houses, particularly Bavaria, which claimed part of Baden's territories. In this configuration, the appearance of a legitimate heir from the direct line of the Zähringen dynasty would mean the immediate loss of power by the Hochbergs and a revision of the entire political map of the region, as established by the Congress of Vienna. The mechanics of the secret structure that ensured the subject's isolation are reconstructed from indirect financial reports and logistical chains described in the memoirs and investigative acts of Anselm von Feuerbach, president of the Ansbach Appellate Court. According to Hauser's own testimony, recorded in the protocols of 1828 and 1829, his confinement took place in a space whose dimensions did not exceed 2 meters in length and 1.5 in width. The diet, consisting exclusively of black bread and water, is confirmed by the biochemical state of the subject's organism at the time of his appearance in Nuremberg. A complete lack of immunity to alcohol, dairy products, and meat, as well as a specific skeletal deformation characteristic of sitting on a hard surface for several years. The logistical scheme for servicing such an object required the involvement of at least 2 individuals. a warden who delivered provisions, and a coordinator who provided financial cover. The existence of this structure was not the result of a private initiative. It had an institutional character. Traces of payments for the guarding and maintenance of such state prisoners were traditionally concealed in expense items for the secret police or in the personal funds of ruling houses. In the case of Baden, suspicion falls on Pilsach Castle, where in the 20th century a hidden room was discovered whose parameters correlate with Hauser's descriptions, as well as on Boygen Castle, which was under the control of officials loyal to the Hochbergs. The process of Hauser's socialization in Nuremberg under the supervision of Professor Georg Daumer revealed the object's anomalous sensory abilities, which, from the perspective of paleoneurology, is a direct consequence of long-term sensory deprivation. However, it was precisely this progress that became the catalyst for activating the elimination protocol. In October of 1829, the first attempt on Hauser's life was recorded. An unknown subject who penetrated Daumer's house inflicted a cut wound on Caspar in the forehead area. Analysis of the object's security system revealed its complete inadequacy. The city authorities, despite his status as a ward of the magistracy, did not provide round-the-clock protection. The interrogation protocol of witnesses described a man in a dark frock coat and mask, which corresponds to the typical description of a political intelligence agent of that time. The failure of the first physical suppression attempt led to a change in the conspirators' tactics. Instead of direct action, a scheme of discreditation and control takeover was employed. Enter Lord Stanhope, the 4th Earl of Harrington, whose financial contributions to Hauser's maintenance exceeded the capabilities of Nuremberg's city budget. Stanhope methodically isolated the youth from his first guardian Daumer and the jurist Feuerbach, insisting on his transfer to Ansbach under the supervision of teacher Meyer. A financial audit of Lord Stanhope's activities points to his close ties with British diplomacy and, according to a number of testimonies, with representatives of the Baden court. The sums he spent on trips with Hauser through southern Germany had no rational justification within the framework of private patronage. The goal of Stanhope, as modern historical criticism suggests, was to test the degree of Caspar's awareness of his past and to prepare the ground for his final removal from the public sphere. In 1832, Stanhope abruptly loses interest in the object, ceases funding, and leaves Germany, which coincides temporally with the strengthening of the positions of Grand Duke Leopold from the Hochberg line. The institutional task had been accomplished. Public opinion was disoriented by rumors of Hauser's fraud, which were actively disseminated in the press on subsidies from Karlsruhe. A critical analysis of sources pertaining to the second and final stage of Hauser's elimination reveals numerous contradictions in official reports. On December 14, 1833, in the city park of Ansbach, Caspar sustained a fatal wound to the chest area. According to his own testimony, obtained before the cessation of vital functions 3 days later, an unknown man handed him a wallet and inflicted a dagger strike. A note was found in the wallet, written in mirror script, containing indications of Hauser's origin from the Bavarian border. Examination of this document showed that it was composed on paper identical to that used in the chancelleries of Ansbach, which indirectly points to the involvement of local administrative resources in the elimination operation. The autopsy protocol, conducted by Dr. Heidenreich, recorded deep penetration of the blade, resulting in damage to the lung and pericardium. The suicide version advanced by the police does not withstand criticism upon analysis of the blade's entry angle and the subject's physical condition, which was afflicted by motor incoordination. Suicide was technically impossible, yet it was politically advantageous for closing the case without further investigation into connections with the Baden house. The fate of the archives related to the Kaspar Hauser case confirms the theory of coordinated information concealment. The personal papers of Anselm von Feuerbach, who had been collecting evidence in favor of the Baden Prince version, disappeared shortly after his sudden cessation of existence in May 1833. Feuerbach died under circumstances bearing signs of poisoning, just a few days after publicly declaring the existence of irrefutable documentary evidence. Interrogation protocols from Nuremberg and Ansbach were subjected to censorship. From them were removed mentions of specific names of court ladies and castle guard officers in Karlsruhe. The financial records of the Nuremberg magistrate for the period from 1828 to 1833 contain lacunae in the sections on payments for special needs, which may indicate the extraction of documents confirming surveillance of the object. The legal consequences of the Hauser case for German jurisprudence proved significant. For the first time in legal practice, the question of a crime against the soul, deprivation of a person's identity, and civil status as a form of criminal act was raised. However, at the political level, the principle of state interest prevailed. The Baden throne remained in the hands of the Hochberg line, and the legitimacy of their power was no longer subjected to open doubts from neighbors. The inventories of property seized after Hauser's liquidation include only a few books, items of clothing, and a coin collection, which underscores his complete dependence on external funding and lack of personal resources. His archive, consisting of diaries and school notebooks, was partially destroyed by his guardian Heir, who in his later reports consistently downplayed the intellectual abilities of his charge. Modern methods of genetic expertise, undertaken in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, yielded contradictory results, which in itself is a subject of historical interest. The first DNA analysis of bloodstains on Hauser's clothing, conducted in 1996, showed no connection to the line of Stéphanie de Beauharnais. However, a repeat study in 2002 using the subject's hair revealed a 95% match of mitochondrial DNA sequences with living descendants of the Zeringen family. These contradictions are explained by possible contamination of samples or deliberate substitution of artifacts in the Kaspar Hauser Museum in Ansbach, which for decades has been under the unofficial patronage of individuals interested in preserving the official version. Thus, the archaeology of power in the Kaspar Hauser case allows us to qualify it not as a mystical enigma, but as a complex operation to ensure dynastic security. The institutional mechanism, which included a system of secret prisons, diplomatic cover in the form of foreign agents, and a judicial system ready to falsify verdicts, successfully coped with the task of neutralizing the biological threat to the ruling regime. Kaspar Hauser was not the child of Europe, but a byproduct of great politics, an object whose life cycle was strictly regulated by the needs of state expediency, from the moment of his artificial isolation to the final physical suppression in Ansbach Park. Further study of the protocols of financial interactions between Munich and Karlsruhe in the period from 1820 to 1830 may shed light on the exact amounts paid for the silence of witnesses. However, the existing body of documents already allows us to assert that there is no place for the irrational in the history of Kaspar Hauser. This was a calculated conspiracy of the elites, implemented with the technical precision characteristic of the bureaucratic apparatuses of the 19th century. Every link in this chain, from the forged letters to the mirror note of the assassin, served one purpose: the preservation of the status quo in the power hierarchy of the Holy Alliance. The physical elimination of the object became the final act of an administrative process that began back in 1812 in the cradle of the Baden prince. The influence of this event on the legal system manifested in the tightening of control over the procedures for registering births and deaths in ruling houses, which was recorded in a number of closed resolutions of the German Confederation's Diet in the second half of the 19th century. Hauser's story remains a paradigmatic example of how the state machine is capable of disintegrating a personality for the sake of preserving the integrity of institutional boundaries. The analysis of the social composition of the conspiracy participants reveals not only the high aristocracy, but also the middle bureaucracy, whose loyalty was bought with promotions and land grants. Thus, the investigators who handled the Hauser case and adhered to the version of his fraud received significant appointments in the Baden internal affairs apparatus in subsequent years. This indicates a system of rewards for effective information suppression. The logistics of the conspirators' meetings were usually disguised as hunting outings or diplomatic receptions, which made them invisible to the official chronicle but left traces in accounts for fodder and communication services. The timing of events, from the youth's first appearance on Pentecost to his elimination on Christmas Eve, also bears signs of operational planning aimed at minimizing public resonance during religious holidays when the attention of municipal services was weakened. In the end, archival data testify that the structure created to manage Caspar Hauser's fate was self-liquidating. After the main goals were achieved and key witnesses, such as Feuerbach and Hauser himself, were subjected to physical suppression, the system dismantled its own communication nodes. Letters were burned, prison castles were rebuilt, and personnel files of Secret Service employees were destroyed. What we today call a mystery is actually the result of high-quality work on clearing the information field, carried out by the state services of Baden and Bavaria in the 1830s. The documentary epilogue of this story lies not in unsolved riddles, but in a successfully functioning dynasty whose right to power was paid for with 16 years of deprivation and one dagger thrust in Ansbach. In summary, it can be asserted that the case of Caspar Hauser represents a classic example of eliminating a systemic error in the mechanism of power inheritance, where human life was merely a variable subject to nullification upon the emergence of a threat to the legitimacy of the entire state structure. This process was implemented without involving supernatural forces, exclusively through budgetary planning, agent work, and administrative pressure, which makes it a subject of detailed study for a historian specializing in the technologies of political domination. The investigation of the financial trail left by Lord Stanhope in the archives of Frankfurt banking houses confirms that his expenses in Germany were covered through bills of exchange, drawn to bearer, and cashed in branches associated with the interests of Baden industrialists. This closes the question of disinterested patronage and reclassifies the figure of the British Earl as a highly paid operational agent whose task was to manage the object during the critical period of its socialization. Every oath of allegiance that Hauser swore to his guardians, every protocol of his interrogation, and every entry in the church book, all these were elements of a bureaucratic game in which the subject had no chances of survival from the very beginning. His appearance was an error of the executors, his existence a problem for the coordinators, and his liquidation the logical conclusion of the security protocol. Such is the objective reality, concealed behind layers of romantic legends and mystical theories, which reveals itself through impartial analysis of the era's documents. Concluding this investigation, it should be emphasized that the legal system of Baden and other German states after 1833 underwent a series of changes aimed at preventing such incidents in the future. However, the essence of power remained unchanged. Control over information and the physical elimination of threats remain fundamental tools of the state apparatus, and the case of Caspar Hauser serves merely as the most documented example of their application. The fate of his archives, fragments of which continue to surface in private collections, keeps supplementing the picture of this large-scale political conspiracy, confirming that there are no mysteries in history, only insufficiently studied financial reports and interrogation protocols. Here we conclude our analysis of the archaeology of power in the case of the Child of Europe, leaving aside any speculations not confirmed by the seal of the magistrate or the signature of the era's inquisitor. It is important to remember that behind every historical enigma stands a specific budget, a system of orders, and the human factor determining the success or failure of institutional planning. In the case of Caspar Hauser, the planning was flawless, and its result, final. The analysis of this case allows us to better understand the mechanics of the functioning of closed systems and the methods by which they protect their interests, disregarding ethical norms and human fates. An important aspect that is often ignored is the role of the press in this process. Newspapers of that time, such as the Augsburger Allgemeine Zeitung, were used to shape the desired vector of public opinion. Through them, narratives about Hauser's imposture and innate feeble-mindedness were disseminated, preparing the ground for his social isolation even before his physical elimination. This was an early example of using media resources to dehumanize a political opponent. Thus, the conspiracy against Hauser was comprehensive. It combined forceful, legal, financial, and informational methods of suppression. This makes it a unique object of study within the political history of the 19th century. What we see here is not merely a crime, but a full-scale state operation that drew numerous institutions and individuals into its orbit, acting as a single mechanism to preserve dynastic stability. The final report on the termination of Caspar Hauser's existence, filed in the Ansbach archives, is not a full stop in history, but a monument to the efficiency of the bureaucratic apparatus in eliminating inconvenient witnesses of the past. With this, our research is concluded. The facts have been presented, the documents analyzed, and the political anatomy of the conspiracy restored in its true, mysticism-free form.